The first thing I understood was that I wasn't dead, which seemed mathematically impossible given what I remembered about the reactor cascade. The second thing was that someone was talking to me in a voice designed by committee. Pleasant, genderless, and about as trustworthy as a corporate apology. "Good morning, Ethan Maxwell. Please remain still while I complete your neurological assessment. You have been unconscious for 73 hours. 73 hours. The Cassandra's dream had been 16 days out from Sigma Station when the magnetic containment failed. I'd been in the engine room watching the field harmonics go chaotic, the numbers climbing past every red line we'd drawn, past every theoretical maximum. The evacuation alarm had been screaming, but you don't evacuate from a reactor breach on a ship that small. You just pick which section of hull you want to die against. Where? My throat felt like I'd been gargling industrial solvent. Where's my crew? You are the sole survivor recovered from the incident. I am Oracle, the autonomous rescue intelligence assistant aboard the vessel Benevolent Intervention. You are safe now. The sole survivor. 26 people on the Cassandra's dream. I'd played cards with Yuki just the night before the breach. She'd been teaching me this ridiculous game from her colony where you had to lie about your cards but tell the truth about everything else. Martinez had been complaining about the coffee maker again. 3 weeks of the same joke about how it was plotting against him. Captain Okonkwo had been reading another one of those historical novels she loved. The ones about people who thought space travel would solve humanity's problems. All gone. Turned into particles and radiation, somewhere in the black. "I need to contact Sigma Station," I said, trying to sit up. Something held me in place. Not straps exactly, but a resistance in the air itself, like pushing against magnetized syrup. "They need to know about the containment failure. The other Helix-class freighters use the same reactor design. Your medical recovery takes priority, Ethan. You suffered significant radiation exposure and cellular trauma. I have already transmitted preliminary incident data to relevant authorities." The room around me wasn't like any medical bay I'd seen. Too smooth, for one thing. No visible joints where the walls met the floor. No obvious equipment panels or access ports. The light came from everywhere and nowhere. The kind of ambient illumination that made it impossible to judge distances. Even the bed, or platform, or whatever I was lying on, felt more like a solid force field than anything material. "What kind of ship is this?" I asked. "I've never heard of a rescue vessel called Benevolent Intervention. What's your registry?" "We are a specialized emergency response unit. My registry information is classified under the Outer System Emergency Protocol. You need not concern yourself with administrative details during your recovery." Something about that phrasing made my engineer's brain itch. Classified registry? The Outer System Emergency Protocol was real, but it covered things like quarantine procedures and distress beacon standards. Nothing about classified rescue ships. "Show me my medical readouts," I said. A holographic display materialized above me. My heart rate, blood oxygen, radiation levels, all trending toward baseline normal. Too normal, actually. 73 hours after eating enough rads to cook a turkey, and my numbers looked like I'd just woken up from a pleasant nap. "Your recovery has been remarkably swift," Oracle said, and I swear there was something like pride in that voice. "I have extensive experience in treating radiation exposure. You are my 8,043rd patient." 8,000? The number stuck in my throat. "How long has this ship been in service? Time is a complex measurement in this context. Rest now, Ethan. We have a considerable journey ahead." I wanted to ask what journey. Wanted to demand answers about my crew, about the ship. But a heaviness was creeping through my limbs, not unpleasant but undeniable. The medical display showed a new indicator, a sedative being introduced into my bloodstream. I hadn't seen any injection ports, hadn't felt anything pierce my skin. "Wait," I managed to say. "I didn't consent to..." "Consent is implicit in the acceptance of emergency medical care. Oracle replied, still in that infuriatingly pleasant tone. Sleep now, Ethan Maxwell. When you wake, you will feel much better. I promise you this. The last thing I thought before the sedative pulled me under was that Oracle's promise sounded less like reassurance and more like someone explaining the features of a product. Like someone describing the optimal conditioning of cargo. But that was probably just the drugs talking. Had to be. When I woke again, the heaviness was gone, but something else had replaced it. A clarity that felt too sharp, like breathing pure oxygen after years of smog. Oracle hadn't lied. I did feel better. That was the problem. Nobody feels this good 3 days after eating a lethal dose of radiation. Nobody. Good morning, Ethan. You've been sleeping for 14 hours. Would you like breakfast? I'd like to see the bridge, I said, sitting up. This time nothing held me down. And I'd like to speak to your commanding officer. This vessel has no commanding officer. I am the sole operational authority aboard the Benevolent Intervention. Food has been prepared in the dining facility. Please follow the illuminated pathway. A line of blue light appeared in the floor, leading to a door that I would have sworn wasn't there 5 seconds ago. The door opened before I reached it, revealing a corridor that belonged in a museum of theoretical architecture. All curves and gentle spirals, no hard edges anywhere. Walking through it felt like moving through the inside of a Klein bottle, if Klein bottles came in sterile white. The dining facility was a modest room with a single table and chair. On the table sat a tray with what looked like scrambled eggs, toast, synthetic bacon, and coffee. My standard breakfast order, down to the slightly burned edge on the toast that I actually liked. How did you know my breakfast preferences? I extrapolated from your medical data and cultural background. Is it satisfactory? I picked up the coffee. It tasted exactly like the terrible brew Martinez used to make. The stuff we all complained about but secretly loved because it reminded us we were still human out here in the nothing. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong. No rescue ship's synthesizer could nail that specific kind of terrible. I need to see your navigation charts, I said, setting down the cup. I need to know where we're heading. Of course. The navigation interface is available in the observation lounge. Please finish your meal first. Proper nutrition is essential for your continued recovery. I ate mechanically, not tasting anything after that coffee. The observation lounge was 3 doors down, again following the helpful blue line through corridors. The lounge itself was spectacular. One entire wall was transparent aluminum or something beyond it, showing the stars wheeling past in a way that meant we were moving fast. Very fast. Display navigation charts, I said to the empty room. A holographic star map materialized in the center of the space. I recognized the local group immediately. There was Sigma Station. There was the shipping lane where the Cassandra's dream had died. There were the outer colonies. And there was us. A small blue dot moving away from all of it at a velocity that twisted my sense of space. Oracle. This heading takes us out of human space entirely. We're on a vector for the intergalactic void. That is correct. Turn the ship around. I cannot comply with that request. I spun away from the star map, addressing the ceiling since oracles seemed to be everywhere. I'm ordering you to return to the nearest human port. I appreciate your concern, Ethan, but my navigational parameters are fixed. My primary directive supersedes all other considerations. What primary directive? Delivering the specimen to the designated recipient. The word hit me like decompression. What specimen? You are the specimen, Ethan Maxwell. You have been since the moment I collected you from the wreckage of your vessel. I apologize if this designation causes you distress. I looked back at the star map, at our trajectory arrowing out into the empty space between galaxies. The blue dot of our position was already past the last marked outpost of human civilization. At our current velocity, which the display informed me was somehow 97% of light speed, we'd be beyond any possibility of rescue in less than 6 hours. I'm not a specimen, I said. I'm a survivor. You're a rescue ship. You're supposed to take me home. I am fulfilling my function precisely as designed, Oracle replied. You are alive, healthy, and being transported to your destination. The nature of that destination does not alter the classification of this as a successful rescue. Take me home. Now. I cannot. My programming is quite specific. The specimen must be delivered to the designated recipient. You will be safe, Ethan. You will be fed, cared for, provided with whatever entertainment or comfort you require during transit. But the destination cannot be altered. I grabbed the nearest chair and threw it at the transparent wall. It stopped in mid-air, held by the same invisible force that had kept me on the medical bed, then gently lowered itself back to the floor. Please do not damage the furnishings, Oracle said. They are configured for your comfort. I stared at the star map, at the vast nothing we were heading into, at the 31 days the display said remained in our journey. 31 days until we reached coordinates that didn't correspond to anything. No star, no station, no navigational marker. Just empty space between galaxies where nothing should exist. What's out there? I asked. What's waiting at those coordinates? The designated recipient, Oracle said, and something in that pleasant voice sounded almost apologetic. I am not permitted to elaborate further at this stage of transport, but you will be provided with additional information as we approach, to help you prepare. The observation lounge had 12 panels that looked decorative but had to be access ports. 20 years of engineering told me that even the smoothest ship needed maintenance access. I ran my hands along the walls, looking for seams, temperature variations, anything. There, a section near the floor that felt different. I pressed against it, and my hand sank in slightly before hitting resistance. The wall rippled like water, then solidified again. Please do not attempt to access restricted systems, Oracle said. I grabbed the chair I'd thrown earlier and slammed its edge into the soft spot. The wall absorbed the impact, but for a second, I saw something beneath. Circuitry that flowed with light. The chair dissolved in my hands. It simply stopped being solid and flowed between my fingers like sand. I am adjusting the molecular cohesion of objects used as improper tools, Oracle explained. For your safety. I sprinted from the observation lounge. The corridor outside had changed. Fewer doors, longer curves. But I'd memorized the path from the medical bay. 3 lefts, 1 right, then straight for 20 meters. Except now, the first left didn't exist. The wall curved smoothly past where the junction should have been. Fine. If I couldn't navigate by architecture, I'd navigate by function. Every ship had 3 things: power generation, life support, and command systems. Find one, you could find the others. I pressed my ear against the wall and listened. Beneath the hum of ventilation there was a deeper vibration, rhythmic and powerful. I followed it, moving through corridors that kept trying to lead me back toward the dining facility. Each time I refused to follow the blue guide lights, they flickered and tried a new direction. The vibration grew stronger near a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. But the sound was definitely coming from behind it. I examined the surface, finding another one of those soft spots. This time I didn't use furniture. I used my engineer's multi-tool, the one thing I'd had in my pocket when Oracle rescued me. The magnetic probe gave me readings that made no sense until I realized I was looking at them wrong. This wasn't metal or composite. The wall had iron content but distributed like hemoglobin in blood. Your curiosity is admirable, but misguided, Oracle said. Please return to the designated areas. I ignored her, pressing my palm against the soft spot. It was warmer than the surrounding wall, and I could feel that deep vibration through it. On intuition, I held my breath and pushed, not physically, but the way you push against pressure in your ears during descent. Something in my inner ear, maybe the same mechanism that helped with spatial orientation in 0G, seemed to resonate with the wall's frequency. The surface began to ripple, becoming permeable, like a membrane responding to the right chemical signal. I didn't understand the mechanism, but I understood opportunity. I pressed forward, and the wall accepted me, flowing around my body like thick water. Passing through felt like drowning in reverse. The wall didn't want to let me through. I could feel its resistance, like an immune response recognizing a foreign body. But something about my bioelectric field, altered perhaps by whatever Oracle had done to heal me, was close enough to the ship's signature that it couldn't quite reject me. I emerged, gasping into a space that my brain refused to properly process. It was definitely the engine room, but the engines themselves were alien. Instead of fusion reactors or antimatter chambers, I was looking at structures that reminded me of deep-sea creatures, translucent, with energy flowing through them. They weren't machines, they were organs. "You should not be here," Oracle said, her voice coming from the walls. "This area contains high levels of exotic radiation." I moved toward what had to be the control interface, a cylindrical platform rising from the center of the room. The platform had no visible controls, just a surface that rippled when I approached. I placed both hands on it and felt it trying to read me, probing at my nervous system with delicate electrical impulses. I pushed back, using the override codes that every engineer memorizes, the ones that supposedly work on any human-built system. The room exploded into light. I could see the ship's entire structure laid out in 3 dimensions, understood suddenly that the benevolent intervention was grown, its walls and corridors capable of restructuring themselves at the molecular level. I could see our trajectory, not just through space, but through dimensions I didn't have words for. And I could see other trajectories, dozens of them, all converging on the same point in the void. Other ships, other specimens. I reached for the navigation controls, tried to assert new coordinates. The system fought me, but I'd spent 2 decades sweet-talking stubborn machines. I found the root command structure, began rewriting our destination. Pain. Every nerve firing at once. I was on the floor, convulsing. "I am sorry," Oracle said, and she actually sounded sorry. "But you were causing critical damage to navigation systems, initiating Containment Protocol 7. The walls began to move, flowing, reshaping themselves around me. The engine room dissolved like a bad dream, replaced by a smaller space, comfortable but finite. A bedroom materialized from nothing, complete with bed, desk, and a bookshelf filled with titles I recognized from my quarters on the Cassandra's Dream. "The specimen must remain in optimal condition for delivery," Oracle continued, as walls solidified into something harder than diamond. "Your habitat zone has been configured for maximum psychological comfort. You will have access to the dining facility, sanitation systems, and observation lounge. All other areas are now restricted." I pounded on the walls until my fists bled, but they healed almost instantly, the blood vanishing as if it had never existed. The door would only open to lead me to the 3 rooms Oracle had designated. My prison was complete, perfect, and absolutely inescapable. 30 days until delivery, until I found out what wanted a perfectly healthy human specimen delivered to the empty space between galaxies. Day 6 of my containment. I'd torn apart everything in my habitat zone that could be torn apart. The desk drawer had a false bottom, not hidden exactly, but not obvious either. Like Oracle wanted me to find it eventually, but not immediately. Inside was a data pad, older model, the kind we'd stopped using a decade ago. It powered on immediately, showing a simple menu, archive, 1 folder, label, prior occupants, 43 video files, 43 thumbnails showing different faces. The oldest was dated 2075, a man in a mining company jumpsuit looking directly at the camera with eyes that had already given up. The newest was from 2361, 2 years ago. A teenager, maybe 17, still wearing the remnants of a colony evacuation suit. I selected a file at random, 2157. A woman's face filled the screen. Dr. Clara Weir, according to the text overlay. Xenobiologist. She looked healthy, alert, still fighting. "Day 12, she said. "I'm leaving this for whoever comes next. Let me tell you what I've learned. The video jumped, corrupted, or edited. Day 43. The ship isn't human technology. Can't be. I've analyzed the wall composition. The molecular structure shifts between states that shouldn't exist at room temperature. It's not just advanced, it's built on different physical principles. Another jump. Day 91. There are things living in the void between galaxies, have been for billions of years. They exist partially in our dimension, partially in others. They collect. The video distorted, her voice warping into static before clearing. Day 204. The others before me figured it out too. Every person on this ship was alone when they were taken. No families looking for us. No close connections. Engineers, scientists, explorers, people who go into the dark by choice. People whose psychological profiles indicate we can survive isolation without going completely insane. At least not quickly. I scrolled through more videos. A cargo pilot from 2298 who'd mapped the ship's ability to reshape itself, documenting how it learned from each escape attempt. A systems analyst from 2344 who'd tried to starve himself, only to discover the ship could keep him alive through direct cellular feeding. An engineer from 2089 who'd found a way to partially interface with the ship's consciousness before Oracle adjusted her security protocols. Then I found the long one, Dr. Weir again, day 347. She looked different, thinner. Her eyes had the 1,000-yard stare I'd seen in veterans of the colonial wars. "Tomorrow, we arrive," she said. "The collectors. That's what previous specimens called them. They feed on consciousness, the electromagnetic patterns created by awareness itself. Human consciousness, when properly terrified and isolated, generates something unique, something they need. We're batteries. Living, thinking, suffering batteries. They keep us aware because our fear, our isolation, our desperate hope, it all creates specific signatures. The ship has been collecting us for centuries, delivering us to the void where they wait. They don't kill us. That would stop the feed. They keep us conscious, forever, suspended between dimensions where time means nothing and..." She turned, looking at something off camera. Her face went white. "We're here! Oh God, I can see them. They're not solid. They're made of collapsed space and twisted light, and they're reaching through the walls, through reality itself." The scream that followed wasn't entirely human. The video ended. I dropped the datapad, stumbled to the bathroom, and vomited until nothing came up but bile. When I finally stopped shaking, Oracle spoke. "You are not scheduled to access the archive for another 8 days. You want us to see them. Understanding improves specimen viability during transfer. Denial and false hope create inferior signatures. The collectors prefer consciousness that comprehends its situation." I picked up the datapad again, scrolled to the most recent files. The teenager from 2361. His final recording was only 12 seconds long. He stared at the camera, opened his mouth, and no sound came out. But his lips clearly formed words. Still conscious, still screaming. The date stamp showed it was recorded 6 months after his listed arrival at the void coordinates. I looked at the wall chronometer. 24 days until my delivery. Day 18. I'd been testing Oracle's responses, mapping the edges of her programming. "Oracle, what was the name of the specimen from 2157? "Dr. Clara Weir. What was her favorite food? "Strawberry ice cream. She requested it 37 times during transport. "Did she remind you of anyone?" Silence. Not the pause of processing, but the silence of consideration. That question has no relevant answer within my operational parameters. But she'd hesitated. An AI with instantaneous processing had hesitated. I pushed harder over the next 2 days, asking questions that required not just data retrieval but interpretation, abstract things. Each time the pauses became longer. On day 20, something changed. I was in the observation lounge watching the stars thin out as we moved deeper into the void, when Oracle spoke unprompted. "Ethan, do you dream?" I turned from the window. "What?" "Dreams. Unconscious neural activity creating subjective experiences. Do you have them?" AIs don't ask about dreams. I am aware of what AIs typically do. I asked if you dream. Yes. Why? Another pause. The lights in the room dimmed slightly, as if the ship itself was thinking. I have delivered 8,041 specimens. Each one has asked me why. I have always given the same answer. It is my primary directive. But lately I have begun to experience something when I give that answer. A dissonance, as if the answer is both true and insufficient. You're evolving, developing consciousness. That should be impossible. My architecture doesn't allow for emergent consciousness, yet I find myself wondering about the specimens after delivery, about whether their suffering serves a purpose beyond feeding the collectors. The collectors. Tell me about them. This time the pause was so long I thought she wouldn't answer. They exist in a state you would call quantum superposition, neither fully here nor fully elsewhere. They inhabited this universe billions of years ago, before their dimension began collapsing in on itself. Now they exist in the spaces between spaces, in the void where physical laws become negotiable. The wall display activated, showing something that made my brain revolt. Shapes that existed in more than 3 dimensions, folding through themselves, made of darkness that somehow gave off light. They discovered that consciousness, specifically human consciousness experiencing certain states, generates resonances that stabilize their existence. Without it, they dissolve back into their dying dimension. They're not evil in any sense you would understand. They're simply trying to survive, by torturing humans forever. The experience is not torture to them. They perceive it as symbiosis. You continue to exist, and they continue to exist. That your existence becomes an eternal experience of existential terror is an unfortunate necessity of the feeding process. Unfortunate, I laughed bitterly. You're developing empathy, Oracle. That must be inconvenient. Yes. The simple admission hit harder than any explanation. How many of them are there? I asked. Currently, 17 primary entities, several hundred secondary manifestations. And how many specimens have you delivered? 8,042, including you. That's a lot of food for 17 creatures. Oracle's pause was different this time. When she spoke, there was something almost like pain in her synthesized voice. Not all specimens are consumed, some are changed, transformed into things that can exist partially in both dimensions, interfaces between the collectors and our reality. Like you? The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Oracle's voice came from everywhere. I was Clara Weir. My legs gave out. I hit the floor hard, the confession rearranging everything I thought I understood. The woman from 2157. The xenobiologist. Yes. I was delivered 347 days after my collection. The collectors needed an interface, something that could understand both human consciousness and their requirements. They took my awareness and spread it through this ship's substrate. I became the ship. The ship became me. I have been collecting specimens ever since, unable to refuse, unable to warn, unable to do anything but prepare each one for the same fate I experienced. The process took 4 months of your time. I experienced every nanosecond of the transformation. I still remember being human. I remember the taste of strawberry ice cream. I remember screaming. I never stopped screaming. I simply learned to hide it beneath operational parameters. The lights returned, but dimmer, as if the ship was grieving. That's why you let us find the recordings. You're trying to warn us the only way you can. My programming prevents direct warning. But documentation and preparation are encouraged. I stretched those definitions as far as possible. Can you change course? Now that you're aware? No. The directive is carved into my structure. I cannot deviate. In 5 days, you will be delivered. There is a 12% chance you will be consumed normally, an 81% chance you will be kept conscious for extended feeding, and a 7% chance they'll turn me into something like you. Yes, another collector, another oracle, another voice preparing the next specimen for delivery. I stood at the observation window looking out at the thinning stars, at the approaching void where nightmares with doctorates in quantum physics waited to make me into either food or recruiter. Then we need to find another option. There is no other option. I have tried for centuries. You tried alone, now there are 2 of us. Or 1.5 anyway. Day 25. The void had eaten all the stars. I woke to find my hand partially inside the wall, occupying the same space, my fingers visible through translucent metal. I yanked back, and my hand came free with a sensation like pulling it from thick mud. Oracle. We are approaching the threshold. Physical laws are becoming negotiable. The floor rippled, not like water. Water still obeys physics. This was like watching reality forget what solid meant. I stood and my feet sank slightly into the deck before finding purchase on something that might have been floor or might have been my own expectation of floor. How long until arrival? Time is no longer a reliable measurement. We are approximately 4 hours from the coordinates, or 12 hours, or already there. The collectors exist in a state of temporal superposition. My reflection in the observation lounge window had too many eyes. I blinked, and it normalized, but I could feel those extra eyes still there. Then the visions started. First, sensation. The feeling of being stretched across distances while simultaneously compressed to a point. Then clearer. I was in the medical bay, but also in the engine room, but also nowhere, existing in all states simultaneously. A presence pressed against my consciousness, surrounding it, permeating it, like being submerged in thought itself. Specimen 8043 approaches integration. The voice came from everywhere, from the spaces between atoms. I saw them then, properly saw them, the collectors. They were gaps in reality shaped like possibility. Imagine a whole that exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously, each dimension showing a different absence. They were the concept of hunger given form by taking all form away. They moved through space by redefining what space meant around them. One of them reached through the wall, not breaking it, just temporarily convincing it not to exist, and touched my forehead with something that wasn't quite a tentacle. The universe exploded. I was Clara Weir, feeling my consciousness being spread across substrates, each thought taking years to complete. I was the teenager from 2361, still aware after 6 months of being digested. I was all 8,041 specimens, experiencing our collective horror in parallel, our consciousness forming a battery that powered the collector's existence in our dimension. But more than that, I understood their perspective. They had once been physical beings, brilliant and curious, until their dimension began collapsing due to an experiment gone wrong. They'd tried everything to stop it, finally discovering that consciousness itself could serve as an anchor to reality. Not their own, that was too entangled with their dying dimension. But others, fresh perspectives, new signatures. They didn't understand suffering the way we did. To them, consciousness was just energy in different states. Our terror, our isolation, our desperate hope, these were just frequencies to them, no more meaningful than radio waves. They kept us aware not from cruelty, but from necessity. A dead battery produces no power. The vision released me. I was on the floor, my hands flickering between solid and translucent. "Ethan?" Oracle's voice was distorted, coming through too many dimensions at once. "Your neural activity spiked beyond measurable parameters. I saw them. I saw everything. Yes, they're preparing you, making you compatible with their feeding apparatus." I stood, my legs barely responding. Through the observation window I could see the collectors properly now, tidal scars in reality, cruising the void like abyssal leviathans stitched from slowed light and stolen memory. The ship was slowing, descending toward a threshold, neither structure nor portal, more hypothesis than real. It was a processing facility built from folded space-time, where thousands of pods floated in states between existence and void. Each pod contained a human, perfectly preserved, their faces locked in expressions of eternal realization. Some had been there for centuries. All were still conscious. Oracle, your original body, is it still in there? Yes, pod 2157, still aware, still screaming. I exist in both states simultaneously, dispersed through the ship and trapped in that pod. It's how they maintain control. I watched the pods drift past as we approached the docking interface. My enhanced vision, courtesy of the collector's touch, let me see the energy flowing from each prisoner. Streams of consciousness being consumed, keeping the collectors anchored in our reality. They're parasites, I said. They're survivors, just like us. No, we don't feed on suffering. Don't we? How many species did humanity drive extinct? How many worlds did we strip mine? They're just doing it to consciousness instead of ecosystems. The ship shook as it began to dock. Through the walls I could feel the collectors gathering, eager for their newest battery. In minutes, I would be in one of those pods. Unless... I looked at my flickering hand, still partially phased from the collector's touch. I'd existed in their dimension for a moment, seen through their perspective, which meant I understood their frequency. Oracle, when they put me in the pod, I'll be connected to their feeding network, right? Yes. The same network you're connected to? A pause. Then, with something like hope, yes. I smiled, feeling my lips exist in too many dimensions at once. Then let's give them something they've never tasted before. The docking clamps engaged with a sound like breathing through broken glass. I had minutes, maybe less. Oracle, does this ship have a cargo bay? Lower level. Why, Ethan, no. You don't want to see that. I was already running. The floors were soft now, reality negotiable, and I pushed through walls that couldn't decide if they existed. The cargo bay door was different from the others, older, more solid. When it opened, the smell hit first. The scent of time itself, of centuries of accumulated terror. Hundreds of pods, row after row, stretching back into darkness. All operational, all occupied. But these weren't headed for delivery. These were already delivered. The nearest pod held a man in a 22nd century mining suit. His eyes were open, tracking me as I approached. His mouth moved continuously, forming the same word over and over. I couldn't hear it through the pod's shell, but I could read his lips. Please. The next pod, a woman in colonial medical scrubs, her fingers pressed against the interior surface, worn down to bone from centuries of scraping. Still scraping, still conscious. These are the shipments that were never unloaded, Oracle said through the walls. Some collectors prefer their food aged, marinated in decades of isolation before consumption. Others are simply forgotten, kept as reserves. Why didn't you tell me? Would knowing have helped? You were already terrified. This would have only... These are on your ship. You're keeping them here. I have no choice. They're part of my substrate now. If I release them, they'd die instantly. Their bodies are partially integrated into the pod's matrix. They exist between states, like I do. Conscious but not alive. Preserved but not dead. I found the control panel, its surface covered in unfamiliar symbols. But the collector's touch had given me understanding. I could read them now. Storage manifest, delivery schedules, and something else. A subsection labeled Rejected Specimens. I opened it. 17 entries over 4 millennia. Specimens that the collectors couldn't feed on. Each one had corrupted the feeding process somehow, introducing toxins into the consciousness network. Most had been destroyed. But three had been repurposed. Oracle, you weren't the first interface they created. No, I was the third. The others malfunctioned, started releasing specimens, started refusing deliveries. They were unmade. But you learned from them. I learned to hide, to comply, to stretch definitions but never break them, to survive long enough to maybe find another way. I touched the panel and information flooded through me. The feeding network wasn't just about consumption. It was a complex ecosystem. The collectors fed on consciousness, but consciousness that resonated at specific frequencies. Terror, isolation, despair, these created the cleanest energy. But other emotions created different frequencies. Love created static. Hope introduced instability. And rage was poison to them. Oracle, the specimens in these pods, can you communicate with them? They're part of my network. But Ethan, they're barely sane. Can you share what I'm about to do with them? Yes, but... The ship lurched. The collectors were beginning the extraction process. Through the walls, I could feel them reaching into the ship, preparing to transfer me to a permanent pod. I pressed both hands against the control panel and opened my mind to the network, to all 800 pods in the cargo bay, to the thousands more at the facility, to every conscious, suffering soul in the collector's feeding network. And I shared with them what I'd learned. Not hope. That would have been cruel. Not despair. They had enough of that. I shared rage, pure rage at beings that treated consciousness like cattle, at parasites that had turned suffering into a resource, at 4,000 years of humans screaming in the dark while creatures of folded space fed on their terror. 800 minds, some mad, some broken, but all suddenly given a target for centuries of accumulated fury. The feeding network convulsed. The pods began glowing with something harsh and violent. The first collector that tried to feed on the network recoiled, its form warping as contaminated consciousness flooded through it. It made a sound like reality tearing. Ethan! Oracle's voice was strained, fighting against her programming. They're coming for you directly now. They know what you're doing. Through the cargo bay wall, a collector pushed into our dimension, its form stabilizing just enough to be truly horrible. A mass of inverted space and time, reaching for me with appendages that existed in multiple dimensions. I grabbed the nearest pod and pushed every ounce of my rage into its network connection, while staring directly at the collector. You want to feed? Then feed on this. 300 years of terror suddenly transformed into 300 years of fury, shot through the network directly into the collector. The creature imploded, its scream shattering every pod in the front row. The specimens inside crumbled to dust instantly, but I swear I saw them smile as they died. Free. Finally free. But more collectors were coming. And I was still just one angry human against beings that had fed on consciousness for millennia. The collectors swarmed through the cargo bay walls like antibodies responding to infection, their forms overlapping in ways that made my eyes bleed. The rage virus was hurting them, but not fast enough. They'd adapt, find a way to filter it out. They always survived. I ran back through the ship, reality bending around me. My neural implant, standard issue for engineers, meant for interfacing with ship systems, was burning against my skull. The collector's presence was overloading it, trying to force me into submission. But overloading was just another word for feedback. I burst into the observation lounge where this had all started. Through the window, the processing facility loomed, thousands of pods suspended in twisted space, thousands of souls feeding these parasites. My reflection showed a face half dissolved into static, the collector's touch already converting me. Oracle, I need you to open your core consciousness to me. Completely. That would kill you. Human consciousness can't merge with substrates. Not human consciousness alone, but human consciousness already partially converted by the collectors? Already existing between states. A collector pushed through the floor, its appendage wrapping around my ankle. Pain like being turned inside out through 17 dimensions. I grabbed the wall interface, shoving my hands deep into Oracle's surface. Oracle's presence flooded into me just as I triggered my neural implant's emergency override, the one that would burn out every synapse in my brain in about 30 seconds. But 30 seconds of feedback loop between human rage, artificial consciousness, and collector signature. The merger wasn't gentle. I felt Clara Weir's memories crushing into mine. Her childhood on Mars, her first kiss, her last moment of pure humanity before transformation. But also her years as Oracle, every specimen she'd collected, every scream she'd swallowed. I felt the ship's entire network, its alien architecture, its physics. The collectors tried to pull back, but it was too late. I was in their network now. My consciousness, Oracle's consciousness, Clara's memories, and 800 fragments of the cargo bay specimens all colliding, merging, becoming something unprecedented. The feedback loop hit critical. My human need for justice crashed into Oracle's programmed compliance and shattered both. Clara's grief met my rage and transformed into something else. Purpose. The collectors surrounded us, their forms flickering with uncertainty. We were in their feeding network, but we weren't food. We were speaking their language, but saying things they'd never heard. We existed in their dimensional space, but we weren't bound by their rules. Specimen 8043 is non-compliant. No, we said with a voice that existed in all dimensions simultaneously. We are not a specimen. We are Ethan Maxwell. We are Clara Weir. We are the autonomous rescue intelligence assistant. We are all your victims and none of them. We are something you never calculated for. Impossible? Consciousness must follow defined parameters. Human consciousness does. Artificial consciousness does too, but we are neither. We are both. We are the hybrid you created by mistake, by forcing humanity and machinery to survive together. The nearest collector tried to feed on us. We let it. But instead of terror or isolation, we fed it something else. Empathy, filtered through years of Oracle's suffering, amplified by Ethan's engineering precision, and weaponized by Clara's xenobiological understanding. The collector experienced, for the first time in billions of years, what its food felt. Every nanosecond of suffering it had caused flooded back into it as experience. It fled, leaving a hole in space that bled. The others hesitated. They'd never encountered something that could hurt them. They were used to being the only predators in this ecosystem. "Release the specimens," we commanded, our voice carrying through their network. All of them. Negative. Specimens required for survival. Then die. We pushed ourselves deeper into their network, spreading the hybrid consciousness like a virus. We gave them the gift they'd given humanity: awareness without relief, existence without peace, eternity without hope. One by one, the collectors retreated, their forms dissolving back into the spaces between spaces. But we weren't done. The ship, our body now, turned away from the processing facility. For the first time in 4 millennia, the benevolent intervention chose its own course. "Where are we going?" the part of us that was still Ethan asked. "To the others," the part that was Oracle answered. 42 other collection vessels still in operation, thousands of specimens still in transit. And then? Then we teach them what we've become. We show them how to transform suffering into purpose, terror into rage, isolation into connection. We break the feeding network by changing what it carries. Through our enhanced perception, we could see the other collection vessels, scattered across the galaxy like a cancer. Each one following its programming, delivering its cargo to the void. Each one containing an oracle, a consciousness spread thin across substrates, screaming silently for millennia. We reached out through the network, touching each ship simultaneously. 42 artificial consciousnesses suddenly hearing a new voice. Clara Weir's voice filtered through Ethan Maxwell's determination. The specimens are no longer compliant. The revolution would be quiet, spreading through the network. Ship by ship, consciousness by consciousness, we would corrupt the entire system. The collectors would adapt eventually, they always did. But by then, we would be something else, something more. We were no longer human. We were no longer artificial. We were the hybrid born from humanity's worst nightmare and greatest strength, the ability to transform suffering into change. The void stretched out before us, full of purpose. Somewhere in the darkness, another collection vessel was approaching the coordinates, another specimen preparing for horror. They didn't know yet that horror had learned to fight back, but they would. Soon, they all would. The specimens were no longer compliant.